Do you believe in life after death? What if a devout priest said he died, went to hell, and came back with a shocking revelation about the church? In today's video, you will learn the real story of Thaddeus Montgomery, a priest who had a near-death experience that changed everything he believed in. Before we start, comment here which city you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this. Now get ready, because what he saw will surprise you. My name is Thaddeus Montgomery, and as I write these words, I still feel the weight of my memories that have shaped every step of my existence. I was born in a small town in the interior of the United States, where the rhythm of life was marked by traditions, simplicity, and a faith that knew no doubt. My parents, devout Catholics, always taught me that faith was the foundation for facing life's adversities. I remember sunny afternoons on the farm, where prayer before meals was as natural as breathing, and stories of the saints were enthusiastically told on long winter nights. Since childhood, something in me pulsed differently. While other children played in the street, I found myself deep in thought, feeling a calling that no one else seemed to notice. At school, teachers commented on my maturity for my age, and my friends wondered if I really understood the mysteries of existence. One day, as I walked along the path of an old church, I heard an inner voice saying, "You are destined for great revelations." That feeling, although inexplicable, drove me to seek a path that would unite me with that which seemed to transcend the material world. At 18, with my heart inflamed with dreams and uncertainties, I entered the seminary. It was there that I discovered a new dimension of what it was to be human. The atmosphere was austere, but full of hope and dedication. Amid long hours of prayer and meditation, I found myself immersed in a never-ending search for answers. I often spoke with my brothers of faith, and in one of those conversations I remember saying, "I feel that there is something more, something that goes beyond the walls of this chapel." A brother, with a serene look, replied, "Faith is an endless path, Thaddeus. Each answer opens new questions." These words resonated with me, opening doors to questions that still haunt me today. During my years at the seminary, I learned the art of sermons and the delicate science of confessions. Each Mass he celebrated was not just a ritual, but an intimate encounter with the divine. I felt the presence of God in every gesture, in every look of hope from the faithful. My name, Thaddeus Montgomery, began to gain notoriety not because of the grandeur of my achievements, but because of the sincerity with which I dedicated myself to my mission. At the age of 25, when I was ordained, the feeling of fulfilling a predetermined destiny was mixed with the nervousness of someone who knows that life holds unimaginable surprises. During the ordination, as I received the crozier from the priest, I heard whispers of support and blessings that seemed to wrap around me like a protective cloak. My first Mass as a priest was a moment of pure emotion. The altar lit up with the faith of the parishioners, and the air vibrated with the energy of 1,000 hearts united in prayer. As I began my mission at the parish, I was greeted with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. He talked to the faithful, listening to their desires and pains, and tried to bring comfort and hope. One autumn afternoon, during an informal conversation after Mass, a man with a white beard confided to me, "Father Thaddeus, your voice brings me the peace I have been looking for years." These words reinforced the purpose of my journey, even before the events that would irreversibly shake my faith. This is the basis of my story, a journey that, between prayers and doubts, turned into a journey that went beyond the limits of what I imagined possible. On that rainy night, the sky seemed to collapse in endless tears as I drove through the streets of Seattle, still immersed in the fervor of the last Mass. The rain was hitting the windshield hard, distorting the view and making each drop seem like an omen of what was to come. The city, normally vibrant and welcoming, took on a dark and unusual atmosphere. As I focused on the road, trying to stay calm, the rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers was the only companion that soothed my growing nervousness. "Keep the faith, Thaddeus," I repeated to myself, seeking solace in the familiarity of the words that had always soothed my soul. But that night, fate had its own plans. It was on a section of the road that, suddenly, a car slid uncontrollably, coming towards me. In an instant, everything happened with a speed that seemed to defy time. I tried to brake, but the wet road turned into a treacherous field of ice, and my vehicle lost grip. The screeching sound of writhing metal, the shattering of glass, and the deafening crash of the collision blended into a cacophony of despair. "Help! Someone help me!" I shouted, with an urgency that welled up from the depths of my being as the car crashed violently into a tree on the side of the road. The pain erupted like waves, each throb a sharp reminder that I was, in my suit, alive, but in grave danger. The impact left me trapped, immobilized inside the wreckage, and the feeling of helplessness mixed with the adrenaline that coursed through my veins. I remember trying to move my arms, looking for an escape, but the hardware seemed to grab every part of me, as if they wanted to keep my soul imprisoned in that moment. As the rain continued its fury outside, the deafening silence of despair took over the space, interrupted only by the distant sound of approaching sirens. "Father Thaddeus, you need to calm down," I thought, in a desperate attempt to invoke the serenity I so often preached. But the reality of the accident, with its brutal rawness, seemed to mock my words. With every second, consciousness faded, and the fear of the unknown squeezed the heart. As I fought the pain and panic, a small voice inside began to whisper, a promise that something was about to happen, something that would change my life forever. In the dim light, I visualized familiar faces and moments of peace that seemed too distant to belong to this world. In this whirlwind of sensations, I heard a shred of voice coming from one of the passing cars. "Stay calm! Help is coming!" someone announced, and even with the hum of my pain, I could capture the hope embedded in those words. The presence of rescuers, although still invisible, began to be felt as a distant echo of an imminent rescue. For a few precious minutes, the boundaries between reality and the supernatural seemed to blur, as my life oscillated between agony and a strange silence that foreshadowed something greater. The accident became not only a physical shock, but also a turning point for my existence. Every sound, every touch of rain, and every beat of my heart were witnesses of a transition that could never be forgotten. At the exact moment the intense pain began to subside, a strange calm came over me. I felt as if a veil had lifted, allowing me to see my motionless body, surrounded by the chaos of the accident. There I was, floating, as if I had been expelled from my own flesh, observing every detail of that devastating scene. From above, the scene took on a surreal dimension. The car, now reduced to a mess of twisted metal and broken glass, looked like a tragic work of art, suspended in time. I saw the rescuers moving with precision, but their faces remained distant, as if they were in a waking dream. I tried to call for help, but my voice seemed to have been silenced by the universe itself. "Someone, please, help me." My voice echoed in an empty space, but there was no answer, just the distant sound of the wind and the murmur of rain below. As I floated, every sensation was magnified. The coldness of the air, the smell of rain mixed with the burning asphalt, and even the muffled sound of my own panic that I had felt moments before, all presented themselves with a clarity that defies any rational explanation. For a brief moment, I felt a strange freedom, as if the bonds of physical form had finally been broken. My mind, freed from the limits of my body, was filled with thoughts and images that I had never been able to fully understand. I saw myself in every detail, every scar, every expression of pain and despair, and at the same time, I perceived myself as a separate entity, a spark of floating consciousness. In this unfolding state, my memories seemed to blend with future scenes, forming a mosaic of time and emotion. What's happening to me? I thought repeatedly, as I tried to understand whether this experience was a prelude to the end or the beginning of a new journey. I felt immense sadness at seeing my own vulnerability, but also an uncontrollable curiosity about the unknown. The voice of a dear friend, now distant, seemed to whisper words of comfort, while images of my childhood and silent prayers in church mixed with the present reality. Every second was an eternity, and the feeling of floating above everything made me question the barriers between life and death. In an almost mystical moment, I felt a presence. It was not human help, but something beyond, an energy that enveloped me with an inexplicable tenderness. A fuzzy figure approached, and for a brief moment, I felt as if I could absorb all of its calm. There were no words, just a silent exchange of understanding. This entity seemed to say, "You are about to discover something greater than any pain or fear." As time seemed to lengthen, I was overcome with a mixture of relief and regret. I couldn't get back into shape, but I also didn't want to give up that momentary freedom. The space around me vibrated with colors and sounds that defied logic, and I felt like I was on the verge of a revelation, about to unlock secrets that transcend the physical body. And then, just as gently as he had been thrown into this state of dismemberment, the feeling began to dissipate. I didn't know if I was being pulled back into my body or if I was entering a new plane of existence. The uncertainty was as intense as the feeling of peace that, for a brief moment, enveloped me. The feeling of freedom and detachment from the body intensified when suddenly, a stream of light invaded my field of vision. As if an invisible force was gently pulling me, I was drawn into a glowing tunnel, the walls of which pulsed with soft, warm colors. It was a passage that, every second, seemed to reveal a new dimension than I had ever imagined. As I walked through this corridor of light, the environment around me became more and more ethereal. I noticed details that transcend physical reality. Geometric shapes danced gently, and each particle of light seemed to carry with it a message of hope and renewal. For a moment, I felt like all the fear and pain had been replaced by an indescribable peace. Is this real, or just a dream? I thought, with the voice of an inner echo, as if my words were absorbed by the immensity of the tunnel. The sensation was so intense that I could hear, almost imperceptibly, soft and consoling voices. Amidst the light, those voices appeared, like whispers reminiscent of old songs, full of tenderness and compassion. One of them, clearer, seemed to come from a familiar place, and its words echoed inside me. "Thaddeus, you are walking the path of truth. Let your heart hear what it has always known." These words, so intense and direct, enveloped me like a comforting hug. Each step forward brought me closer to a meeting point with the unknown, but at the same time, the feeling of security increased. It was as if I was about to find the source of all the compassion and wisdom I had ever sought. As the light became more vibrant, I noticed the presence of figures gently emerging from the light. At first, they were just outlines, delicate shadows outlined against the glow of the tunnel. But as I advanced, I was able to distinguish more precise features. Serene faces, with expressions that overflowed with love and understanding. One of these figures slowly approached. He wore a robe that shone with a golden hue, and his eyes conveyed the calm of someone who has already understood the mysteries of existence. "Welcome, Thaddeus," said the figure with a voice that was both firm and gentle as if it carried the wisdom of the ages. "Who are you?" I replied, my voice filled with a mixture of amazement and reverence as I tried to absorb every detail of that mystical encounter. "I am a messenger of light, sent so that you can see beyond the veils of the material world," replied the angelic being, making each word sound like a sacred melody. As I allowed myself to be guided by the light, the figure continued to speak, explaining that the tunnel was not just a passage to the afterlife, but rather an inner journey, where each soul has the chance to reevaluate their own truth. Here, pain and doubts are transformed into teachings, and love is the key that unlocks the secrets of the universe, stated the messenger. I felt that, for brief moments, all the anguish that had accompanied me throughout my life dissipated, being replaced by a profound and transformative clarity. Every light, every voice, seemed to reveal that existence was a continuous learning cycle, where challenges served to bring us closer to the divine. The tunnel of light represented a portal to a new understanding, an open window to what is purest and truest in the human essence. "Move on, Thaddeus. The journey has just begun," concluded the angel, as the light pulsed in response to my emotions. As if the softness of the light wasn't enough to prepare my spirit, the glow tunnel began to lose its vigor. In an instant, tranquility turned to restlessness, and I felt an unstoppable pull toward an unknown abyss. As I walked away from the luminous refuge, the environment that emerged was opposite to everything I had experienced until then. What once appeared to be a portal of peace gradually dissolved into a landscape of dense, pulsing darkness, where the air vibrated with a murmur of anguish. The warm and welcoming colors gave way to distorted and cold tones, which undulated as if they had a life of their own. I felt my heart race with fear, and an inner voice that had previously comforted me now whispered warnings of imminent danger. "Thaddeus, what's going on?" I asked myself, my voice trembling, as I tried to understand the turn of events that led me to such a hostile place. As it progressed, the darkness became more and more vivid. It was not the absence of light, but an oppressive presence where every shadow seemed to hide a torment. Distorted images of faces and shapes began to materialize around them. They were not figures of comfort, but souls in agony, trapped in a cycle of pain that had no end. Their expressions were a mixture of despair and resignation. Some tears, others silent screams, echoed like a tragic melody of loss and regret. Near me, a hoarse and suffering voice rose, in a tone that sounded as much like a lament as a desperate cry for help. "Forgive us, please. We are trapped." "Here!" he cried, as an ethereal figure struggled through the fog. I tried to respond, but my voice seemed swallowed by the oppressive environment. Each step he took deepened the feeling of being plunged into a personal hell, where negative emotions materialized in almost palpable forms. The floor seemed to pulse with beats that imitated a broken heart, and the walls, if they could be called that, vibrated with echoes of anguish. In this scenario of torment, my mind was filled with doubts and fears. I questioned my own existence. Was this the punishment for what I failed to understand, or an internal reflection of fears that had never been resolved? In the midst of these reflections, a feeling of dread mixed with a strange fascination took hold of me. I saw people, souls, who had lived lives of apparent virtue, now lost in an endless cycle of regret and loneliness. Each of them seemed to carry an invisible burden, a weight that transformed their memories into something cruel and eternal. As I advanced, the darkness revealed disconcerting details, cracks in the matter itself where an opaque light tried to seep through, and figures that faded whenever I tried to focus on them. A suffocating atmosphere of guilt and regret enveloped everything, making every breath a monumental effort. I didn't know if it was divine punishment or just a reflection of my own deepest doubts and fears. Only one certainty was formed. At that moment, what I faced was the true inner abyss, where hell became a projection of human emotions and choices. As I moved through the dark environment, the pain and despair of the souls wandering in torment intensified around me. Each figure that appeared seemed to carry a tragic story, as if each tear and scream were witnesses to a life full of choices and regrets. I walked, paralyzed, and at the same time compelled to understand what was unfolding before my eyes. Amid the pulsing darkness, I could make out approaching shapes. A larger silhouette, with familiar features but marked by an expression of indescribable pain, began to reveal itself. As I got closer, the figure gained definition, and to my amazement, I recognized in it the face of Christopher Reed, my old mentor, the one I once admired as a guide of faith. His gaze, once serene and confident, now overflowed with anguish and guilt. Thaddeus. His voice, hoarse and filled with suffering that cut my soul, echoed through the void. "Christopher, what happened to you?" I asked, my voice choked with shock and sadness. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes lost in memories that seemed to torture every inch of his essence. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from an endless abyss, he spoke. "I dedicated my life to keeping up appearances, Thaddeus. I was a pillar of faith, but behind the prayers and rituals, pride and hypocrisy hid. My soul was corroded by a poison that I never wanted to see. Now I'm stuck in this place, paying the price for empty devotion." His words echoed like a lament, a painful truth that was impossible to ignore. In his eyes, I saw the reflection of a life of sacrifices that turned into an emotional prison. All around, other souls also cried out for forgiveness and redemption, but no voice reached the depths of what Christopher shared. The atmosphere seemed to vibrate with the collective agony of those who had lost their way because they had not faced their own demons. As he continued, his trembling hands gestured, as if to lift away the weight of past sins. "I was your mentor, Thaddeus, and I failed to guide not only my disciples, but myself. My devotion became a burden, and the truth, hidden beneath layers of pride, condemned me to this eternal torment." I felt a mixture of compassion and disbelief upon hearing his confession. How could someone so influential, who in life had inspired so many, find himself so torn apart by his own soul? His eyes searched mine, begging for an understanding that only truly repentant hearts can offer. "I'm sorry, Christopher. Perhaps this is our punishment, but it can also be a path to redemption. If we accept our flaws, perhaps we can find the light even in this inner hell." But as much as his words touched something in me, the environment around me didn't allow for distractions. The voices of other souls increased, each with their own narrative of pain and despair. Among the laments, I noticed whispers that were mixed in, stories of people who lost themselves by not recognizing their mistakes, who sank into guilt and regret, and who now wandered aimlessly, condemned to carry the burdens of their choices. As I listened to that silent chorus of suffering, a sense of urgency came over me. Christopher's revelation was not just a reminder of the past, but a warning of what the true essence of faith could become if not lived with honesty and compassion. Amid this scenario of tormented souls, I understood that the hell I saw was not imposed by a divinity, but the internal reflection of a heart deviated from true love. At the height of despair, when darkness seemed to have taken over every corner of my soul, a sudden change interrupted the torment I was experiencing. As the weight of the suffering of souls and Christopher's lament filled that oppressive space, a faint light began to appear on the horizon of darkness. It was not the warm, welcoming light of the tunnel that I had previously experienced, but rather an intense, almost palpable glow that seemed to carry with it the promise of redemption. Suddenly, a figure emerged from this glow, outlined with features of perfection and serenity. His presence was striking, an aura that overflowed with calm and compassion, contrasting in an abysmal way with the hellish environment that surrounded me. The being had soft features, with eyes that radiated a depth that reached to the core of any being that dared to look. He wore a robe that oscillated between pure white and ethereal gold, and his gestures were fluid, as if every movement was in perfect harmony with the universe. Thaddeus. The angel's voice sounded with a clarity that seemed to cut through the suffocating silence, reverberating in every particle of the environment. Who are you? I stammered, feeling a mixture of awe and disbelief. My voice, weak and full of emotions, could barely express the magnitude of that encounter. The angel approached, and for a brief moment, the oppression of hell seemed to recede. His eyes, filled with unwavering light, conveyed the feeling that I was finally being welcomed into a universal embrace of love and compassion. "I am called Gabriel," replied the figure, using a name that echoed ancient stories and sacred legends. "I came to guide you so that you understand that the hell you see is not a divine punishment, but a reflection of the distance that many distance themselves from truth and love." As Gabriel spoke, his words penetrated my soul, disarming the fears and doubts that had accumulated throughout my entire journey. He explained that the suffering he witnessed was the result of choices, regrets, and the inability to accept one's own failures. "The real hell is living apart from love, Thaddeus. It is not about punishment, but about a state of mind where pride and lack of compassion become chains that imprison the soul," he said with conviction, as his hand reached out, as if inviting my very essence to free itself from the torment. I felt a gentle force pulling me, a feeling that if I surrendered to this light, it would be possible to transcend the threshold between life and death. As the angel continued, "You still have a mission, Thaddeus. The world that awaits you carries within it both pain and hope. Return not to abandon your faith, but to reconfigure it with the purity of true love." These words, filled with a truth that surpassed any dogma, filled me with an inexplicable calm. It was as if in that moment, all the suffering and doubt that tormented me became insignificant before the comforting glow of divine compassion. Then, a sudden change began to unfold. The luminosity around me intensified, and at the same time, I felt a force pulling me back into my body. The environment, which until then oscillated between reality and the spiritual plane, began to fade. Gabriel's last words echoed in my ears like an eternal whisper. "Come back, Thaddeus. Your journey is not over yet." In the blink of an eye, the feeling of weightlessness was replaced by the sharp, real pain of physical impact. I felt the cold air and the rough texture of metal around me, as if I were being thrown back into reality, into a world where time and space did not bow before the mystery of the soul. It was as if, in a single instant, the angel and all the peace he represented were absorbed, leaving me once again trapped in my body. As darkness and light blended into a whirlwind of sensations, I felt my consciousness being dragged back to reality. In the blink of an eye, the ethereal calm of the encounter with Gabriel dissipated, giving way to the brutality of the physical world. I awoke, or rather was brought back, not consciously, but as if a heavy veil had been lifted, and I was now at the mercy of a deep torpor. I vaguely remember the constant sound of heartbeats and the indistinct murmur of rescuers. My body, enveloped by injuries and the stiffness of a coma induced by the severity of the accident, was in a state of suspension between life and death. Machines around me hummed in sync, as if trying to keep a faint hope alive. Each beep that appeared on the monitor was an affirmation that I still existed, but consciousness seemed to struggle to regain its composure. In the midst of this limbo, physical pain mixed with internal restlessness, and I was faced with a crisis of faith that could never have been predicted. There was no longer the usual comfort of repetitive prayers or familiar words that once soothed my soul. Instead, every thought brought an avalanche of doubts and questions. "Why, Lord? Why did you bring me back if I wasn't ready to understand yet?" I murmured in a weak and interior voice, while my spirit oscillated between confusion and despair. Was Gabriel's light a sign of redemption or just a passing illusion? He asked, while the echoes of old prayers mixed with memories of a ministry guided by unshakable faith. During those days in a coma, my mind wandered to corners where religious teachings and dogmas clashed with the new reality that was imposed on me. The familiar voices of sermons and prayers seemed distant, as if they had been replaced by a chorus of insatiable doubts. In one of these ramblings, I visualized myself in a room filled with images that represented both the glory of a promising heaven and the horrors of an inner hell. The walls of this mental space were lined with the words of the Psalms, but each letter pulsed with a new weight, a charge of uncertainty and fear. The doctors and nurses approached, murmuring in a tone of relief that I had survived the accident. However, for me, awakening was a tortuous process. Every movement was accompanied by excruciating pain, and every blurred vision reflected the doubts that gnawed at my faith. On a particularly difficult afternoon, as a nurse was stroking my hand, I heard her say with a tenderness that mixed concern and hope, "You're going to be fine, Father Thaddeus. Come back to us. We are here to help you." But the words sounded distant, as if they were echoing from a place where faith no longer had the same meaning. Inside me, the image of Gabriel and the serene voice of the angel mixed with the painful memories of the accident and the horrors experienced in the tunnel of light that had turned into darkness. This duality created a rift in which everything I believed in seemed to crumble. How could I, who always sought the truth in rituals and doctrine, accept that the true essence of faith revealed itself precisely in doubt and suffering? During the long hours in which my consciousness oscillated between states of alert and delirium, I struggled with the idea that faith may not reside in repetitive rituals, but in the ability to feel, question, and rebuild oneself after a fall. This understanding, which previously seemed impossible, began to germinate in the midst of anguish. I realized that the scars that now marked not only my body, but also my spirit, could be the signs of a rebirth. As the days turned into a succession of indistinct moments, a feeling of emptiness filled my being. The truth that I knew, guided by traditional doctrine, seemed to crumble with each beat of my heart. I longed for an answer that reconciled the pain of the present with the hope of a more authentic future. This internal dilemma forced me to question everything, from the sacred words I recited to the very meaning of life and death. The crisis of faith that gripped me was both devastating and liberating. I realized that perhaps true spirituality resided in the courage to embrace uncertainty, in the strength to seek answers even when all certainties were shattered. As the shadow of the coma lengthened, it left in its wake an invitation to transformation, an invitation to rethink the foundations of everything I had experienced. When I woke up from that remarkable experience, something inside me had been irreversibly transfigured. Upon returning to the parish, the feeling of familiarity that had once enveloped me was replaced by a deep inner turmoil. My prayers, which were previously recited automatically, were now filled with questioning and, above all, a search for a more genuine truth. The first week after my awakening, I was invited to lead a special Mass. The environment was full of familiar faces and new believers, who, amid murmurs of hope and fear, eagerly awaited a message that could rekindle the flame of faith. As I began the sermon, I felt the weight of each word and the responsibility of translating my transformation to those who listened to me. "Brothers and sisters," I began, my voice firm but filled with sincere emotion, "today, I come before you not only as a priest, but as a man who has faced the depths of his own being. I experienced an abyss that forced me to rethink what it means to truly live the faith." As the words echoed in the silence of the church, I could see expressions of surprise, astonishment, and even skepticism. Among the audience, Benjamin Carter raised his hand, his voice trembling with emotion. "Father Thaddeus, how can we accept this change? If faith is not based on our rituals and dogmas, then what truly unites us? I took a deep breath, feeling that that moment was the culmination of a transformation that needed to be shared honestly. I responded with conviction. Benjamin, true faith does not reside in mere rituals, but in the authenticity of our heart. If we turn away from love and compassion, we lose the essence that makes us truly human. My experience showed me that the path to God involves recognizing our failures and having the courage to reinvent ourselves. After the Mass, the atmosphere within the community transformed. Some parishioners approached with tears in their eyes to share their own doubts and stories of overcoming. Others, immersed in deep-rooted traditions, demonstrated skepticism, rejecting the idea that faith could be so fluid and open to personal interpretation. In a spontaneous conversation, Olivia Turner, who cared for me during my coma, commented tenderly, "Thaddeus, your new way of seeing faith invites us to look within, to forgive and to love without judgment. Even if some still don't understand, I believe this is the path to a more authentic start." These words resonated with me, consolidating the transformation that was already taking place in each act and each word spoken. I began organizing meetings outside the formal church environment, creating discussion groups that allowed everyone to share their spiritual experiences without the rigidity of traditional rituals. At one such retreat, in a park outside Seattle, I heard Madison Stone, an initially skeptical journalist, confess, "I never imagined that faith could be so human and vulnerable. Your story touched me in a way I've never experienced." Each meeting, each sermon, was a step towards the reconstruction of a spirituality that united the divine and the human. Even in the face of criticism from the most conservative, the new approach began to attract those who longed for a more inclusive and loving faith. The transformation in my ministry was not just a change of speech, but a rebirth that was expressed in every gesture, in every look of someone who found comfort and truth in the words that now flowed from my heart. Now, as time softens the scars of the experience, I feel the need to share the lessons I learned, not to teach, but to remind myself and those who cross my path that life is a path of constant renewal. Since returning to my daily life, away from the spotlight and grandiose preaching, I have been walking along a road where each step is an opportunity for reflection and transformation. On morning days, when the soft light of the sun invades the hospital room, I remember the nights when darkness seemed to be the only shelter for my doubts. I felt fragmented, divided between the man I always believed I was and the being who was reborn in the midst of chaos. During the long periods of recovery, as my thoughts wandered between what I had been and what I could become, I heard voices, not just those of my superiors or the advice of my doctors, but the voices within that whispered about the essence of life. Once, while walking through the quiet hallways of a rehabilitation center in Seattle, I met Olivia Turner, who was not only the doctor who cared for me, but a friend who had become part of my journey of rescue and self-discovery. She told me, with a serene look and a restrained smile, "Thaddeus, what you experienced is not just a physical miracle. It's an invitation for all of us to rethink what it really means to be alive. Every scar, every pain, are reminders that existence is made up of new beginnings." These words stuck with me, guiding me to see faith from a new perspective. Today, I understand that symbols and rituals, although important to many, are not the essence of spirituality. The true meaning of faith lies in human connection, empathy, and the ability to forgive, especially oneself. During one of my night walks through the streets of Seattle, in a small square lit by lamps and the twinkling of stars, I heard a child ask an elderly man, "Do you believe that love can heal even the deepest wounds?" The elderly man, with the wisdom of the years stamped on his face, replied calmly, "My young man, love is the balm of the soul. He teaches us that even in the darkness, there is a light that never goes out." These words, simple and sincere, reflect the truth I learned. Transformation does not come from dogmas or rituals, but from the ability to look within and accept our imperfections. My experience, although marked by moments of despair and terror, culminated in an awakening to a reality where hope is renewed with each dawn. Today, I don't seek the spotlight of lectures or writing books that perpetuate my story. I prefer to live authentically, discreetly helping those who approach me in search of comfort. I participate in support groups and spiritual retreats, where the exchange of experiences takes place naturally and without judgment. In each conversation, I feel that the true essence of life manifests itself, the never-ending search for love, compassion, and truth. Looking back, I see that the path I took, from seminary to near-death experience, from pain to rebirth, was full of twists and turns that, no matter how traumatic they were, led me to a deeper understanding of myself and spirituality. Each challenge faced turned into an invitation to grow, to question, and above all, to love. This is my final reflection. Life is a gift that must be valued in every breath. Difficulties are just milestones on a journey that, if faced honestly, reveals to us that true redemption lies in the ability to reinvent ourselves and the courage to be vulnerable.